Welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Morag, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, eco-villager, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating, and acting regeneratively. For a long time, it's been clear to me that to shift trajectory to a thriving one-planet way of life, we first need to shift our thinking. The way we perceive ourselves in relation to nature, self, and community is the core. So this is true now more than ever, and even the way change is changing. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us at a rapid pace. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are worthwhile and nourishing and are working towards resilience, regeneration, and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? In this podcast, I'll share conversations with my friends and colleagues, people who inspire and challenge me in their ways of thinking, connecting, and acting. These wonderful people are thinkers, doers, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers, educators, people whose work informs permaculture and spark the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, socially just future could look like. Their ideas and projects help us to make sense in this changing world, to compost and digest the ideas, and to nurture the fertile ground for new ideas, connections, and actions. Together, we'll open up conversations in the world of permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, eco-literacy, and much more. I can't wait to share these conversations with you. Over the last 3 decades of personally making sense of the multiple crises we face, I always return to the practical and positive world of permaculture, with its ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. I've seen firsthand how adaptable and responsive it can be in all contexts, from urban to rural, from refugee camps to suburbs. It helps people make sense of what's happening around them and to learn accessible design tools to shape their habitat positively and to contribute to cultural and ecological regeneration. This is why I've created the Permaculture Educators program, to help thousands of people to become permaculture teachers everywhere through an interactive online dual certificate of permaculture design and teaching. We sponsor global perma-youth programs, women's self-help groups in the Global South, and teens in refugee camps. So anyway, this podcast is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute and our Permaculture Educators program. If you'd like to find more about permaculture, I've created a 4-part permaculture video series to explain what permaculture is and also how you can make it your livelihood as well as your way of life. We'd love to invite you to join our wonderfully inspiring, friendly and supportive global learning community. So I welcome you to share each of these conversations, and I'd also like to suggest you create a local conversation circle to explore the ideas shared in each show and discuss together how this makes sense in your local community and environment. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet and speak with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It's my great pleasure to share with you today on Sense Making in a Changing World, a conversation I recorded with Daniel Christian Wahl, a great friend of mine and someone who I consider to be one of the most brilliant thinkers of my generation. This conversation was recorded as we walked together through the ancient olive terraces around an old monastery called Rullan in Mallorca last year. We met there for the first time, actually, and it was the beginning of a friendship that's continued. We'd known of each other for years, but finally we met. We're both deeply involved in eco-villages, in regenerative education and design, and have deep affiliations with places like Schumacher College and also with the Global Ecovillage Network. Daniel's book, Designing Regenerative Cultures, published in 2016, is what I consider to be essential reading, helping us to reframe the crises we currently face and explore ways that we can live into the future. He brings together some of the most important thinking of our time and weaves it together with a series of questions which help to provoke us to think about how we can collaborate in the creation of diverse and regenerative cultures. So I hope you enjoy walking with us in this conversation in the Mediterranean. I'm on Mallorca at the moment with Daniel Wahl. And it's a great pleasure to be here. We've kind of known of each other for, I think, 20 years or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Finally, we get to meet.
In this place as well.
I know, it's a gorgeous place. I don't know if you can see behind us. So what's this place called?
It's Rullan.
And whose place is it?
It's owned by a friend of mine who's a fashion designer called Sibylla.
Right.
And she has been stewarding this place for, I think, by now 20 years. And it's been home to a lot of people who at some point in their life needed to kind of reflect and have a break and kind of power down a bit. And it's such a magical environment to do that in.
And you've run lots of different programs here too, I understand.
Yeah, when we first got to Mallorca, Sibylla invited Alice and me to stay here for 7 months.
Oh, that's such an amazing experience. Oh my gosh.
And I helped Mandy organize the first EDE, Ecovillage Design Education course here.
Oh, great.
In 2011.
Yep.
Which was right there on this terrace down that we just walked past.
So we're up here above, and behind us here, I don't know if you can see it in the screen, that's the Mediterranean. And then if we swing around a bit this way, we're surrounded by ancient olive trees and
the Sierra de Tramontana up there.
Huge mountain range up behind us, which I actually don't think I was quite expecting when I came to Mallorca.
That's Mallorca's secret, because we have the mountains and we have them where they are. It means that all the moisture that comes over from the Pyrenees rains off in the mountains. And we have pretty lush green area in the mountains, and then on the other side of the island it's almost a semi-arid desert.
So what brought you to Mallorca in the first instance? I mean, you're German, aren't you?
I'm German originally, but ever since I been a little boy, like 6 months old, my grandmother took me to Italy for my holidays.
Oh, okay.
So basically, by the time I was 18, I'd already spent a year and a half in the Mediterranean, near the Mediterranean. And realized that one doesn't need to live in northern climates if one chooses to do otherwise. And I've always wanted to live in, I've tried twice to live in Spain. And then the third time, after leaving Findhorn, Sibylla, who I'd met at the Bioneers conference I organized in Holland, invited me that I could come and stay here for a while. And I also really liked the idea of Mallorca being a case study site for bioregional development. Because after my time in the Ecovillage movement and also helping with transition town initiatives at the beginning of the transition town boom, I sort of realized that the scale at which you can create a really regenerative sustainable system is bioregional and not quite so small as I had thought for 15 years. Like this whole self-sufficiency story that a lot of people get into in the beginning, I realized that to really create resilience, you have to create it with lots of people in your region and with lots of communities in the region.
So just tell me a little bit more about that, because you've written a book, and the book's called Designing Regenerative Cultures. So maybe we could start with saying, what do you define as being a regenerative culture? What does that mean to you? What does it look like in your eye, in your mind's eye? If you imagine it, what do you see?
Well, first of all, it's really important that it's designing regenerative cultures, that it's plural. Because I think that these cultures have to be very carefully adapted to what I call the biocultural uniqueness of place. So the local ecosystem and its opportunities and challenges, and the whole history of the local culture and who lives there and their stories. So each regenerative culture will express itself differently depending on their history and their place. And for me, because everything keeps changing continuously, it's really about the capacity of the people in that place to live in ways that leave the place more bioproductive, more abundant, healthier, more valuable in all ways, not just in terms of human value, than they've received it from their forebearers. So it's about healing the landscape, restoring ecosystems, and making them as bioproductive as they can be, which is what you've been busy with all your life.
So I was about to ask you though, so in order to do that, what's the type of education that we need to support that unfolding or the emergence of these cultures that you're talking about?
I think first of all, we need to get off the mindset that education is something that you do in the first third of your life, and then you just work, and then you get retired.
Yes.
We have to rediscover education as something that is a lifelong process of educare, drawing out our full potential. And the potential changes as we gain experience and our surroundings change. So it has to be lifelong learning.
Yes.
And I think we know a lot of wonderful educational initiatives that both you and I have been involved in the Ecovillage movement, Gaia Education, Gaia University, the whole permaculture network, the regenerative agriculture, and all those networks that are doing wonderful work. Other people like Otto Scharmer with Theory U and all these processes. We need a holistic education that enables people to do this regenerative work in their place.
Yes.
So one of my mentors from the Regenesis group in their regenerative practitioner training, they really highlight the importance of capacity building as part of working regeneratively.
And so when you say that, what do you mean by capacity building? In what way?
Capacity building it's all the dimensions. It's like in the Gaia Education curriculum, we have the social, economic, ecological, and worldview dimension.
Yeah.
And I think we've created an education system that creates too many generalists, and we now have all the information stored at our fingertips through computers that we really need generalists that know how to integrate and synthesize and connect information. And that requires being able to talk to people. So it's communication skills. There's also how to run a project and how to budget it and how to fundraise for it and all those kind of things, or have innovative ways of funding it. So you have to have some kind of economic literacy too.
Yes.
Social literacy, economic literacy. But then, of course, all the ecological literacy that we can draw out of permaculture and other such methods that have studied the patterns in nature and have tried to invent human ways that connect with these patterns to enhance them, because we are part of nature, we're not separate from it. They also can meaningfully inform how we do business and how we build our communities. And,
Absolutely.
And I think that it's the big challenge, we talked about this yesterday, is that can we create the network that now that we're at this critical point in human history where I believe that if we get it right, we will upskill millions of people in the next 5 years to do this work.
And I think my mind started going a buzz when you started talking about the scale that you're talking about. I think it's absolutely critical, but it sort of bounced me out of my kind of thinking about local and community and even bioregional, because what you're talking about is it's kind of like a global awakening. Yeah,
but it's local. It's locally grounded in the story of place, in the biocultural uniqueness of place.
Yeah.
But I think we're sort of at the brink that at least a percentage of the people who are part of that elite monetary class that has now amassed vast amounts of money are beginning to realize that they will not be able to enjoy that money if the planet goes to ruin, and we're going there fast. And so I think the money will be made available to train up these people. And so that means all the organizations who for years, 30, 40 years, some of them, have been struggling in skilling up a few permaculture teachers a year. Like, how many do we get to? 10,000 a year if we're lucky, globally. And it's amazing. But at the same time, it's not enough.
No, it's not enough.
And so I envision bringing all these players together to at least make visible this pathway that already exists, that somebody could take to really become part of the regeneration rising, to find their path in all this, to maybe specialize a little bit, say I'm more of a facilitator guy or I'm more of a agroforester, but to at least know the value of all of them and how they talk to each other in a regenerative system.
And so how do you see all of this linking in with the major movements that are emerging now? You know, the climate action.
Well, I just this morning had a real moment, like I was watching all the footage from last weekend in London and the Extinction Rebellion. And as much, I mean, it's good friends of mine are activating that, but I'm not 100% sure maybe rebellion speaks to a certain age group in a way that you get more excited about joining it. But for me, it has a sort of, as much as they say there is still a chance, I see the negative message first. And I feel coming from fear isn't really unleashing people's creativity.
And so how do you think that's...
for me, catching all that energy that is in Extinction Rebellion and catching all that energy that is now with Greta Thunberg's amazing work in Fridays for Futures and really giving it a little bit of a spin towards we are the regeneration rising. We can in all these places become a force to heal our ecosystems, and in that process heal ourselves. And then to really also challenge these silos we're still in. I don't think that the world of the 22nd century will be a world of nation states. It will be a world of people being carefully adapted to their bioregion in global collaboration. And so all this thing that we're still holding on to of national identities and stuff, they'll take generations to be absorbed and not become so important anymore. But we need to start realizing that we're one humanity on one planet, part of the community of life, and either we express that we are part of the community of life. I think Janine Benyus nailed it with saying life creates conditions conducive to life. And as life, we are capable of creating conditions conducive to life. And
should we start?
That's what we need to do.
So there's a couple of things that you've just said in there. One of them being about just slightly turning, or slightly. Well, it's something about. There's this movement rising, and I feel like all of the work that we've been doing in the Ecovillage movement, the permaculture movement, the bioregion movement, like for decades, all this work is there kind of waiting and for this activation to happen. But my question is about how do we turn on, how do we kind of connect the two so that it's this fluid movement? Have you got any ideas on that?
I'm still waiting for it to happen to some extent. Like I've reached out to some of the voices in the Extinction Rebellion, and I mean, for example, George Monbiot really picked up on Jeremy Linn's work and a little bit on Kay Revos's work, but I've not seen him fully embrace this idea of the regeneration rising and all the kind of regenerative movements around the planet, which is exactly what he's calling for. So I think we really need to. Certainly in my work, I try to make these movements visible to each other, and I try to celebrate our diversity, rather than kind of trying to create a sort of storyline around how regenerative is better than biomimicry and better than permaculture. I see all of these are regenerative cultures, these movements, and they're now coming together. It's like a confluence, and that means that we all need to be able to amplify each other's work.
I think that what you said about making them visible to each other, that is just such a critical point, isn't it? And it is about supporting each other and working with each other, and I think that's going to be the key, because we all want really the same thing, don't we?
Exactly. And it's part of our, what do we, you asked earlier, what education do we need? We certainly need an education that teaches us to think in a yes and rather than a no but way. And even I think that in our movement I still find it so often that people pick up on the little bit where they don't like the wording, or they don't like that particular nuance of somebody's way of working, instead of saying, wonderful, we're all broadly aligned and we're all still learning, we're all making mistakes. And so if I didn't quite like the second side sentence that this person meant, but I love the rest of the conversation, let's not start at the little bit we've got to niggle with.
I totally agree with that.
And co-create a world that actually embraces our diversity, also our diversity of opinion, as part of our creativity.
So what do you think are some of the next steps that we need to be taking in this regenerative movement?
To watch ourselves not to create another, because we don't really have time for another round of them and us type gaming. And so that for me always is an invitation to who are the people that I would feel least comfortable talking to, and then seeking them out to talk to them.
Okay.
And I also think that we're still a little bit under the illusion how many of us there are. The numbers are growing rapidly, and they've been growing rapidly in the last 3 or 4 years. But I think we need to go beyond that into popular culture. We need to engage the arts, the music industry.
So you were talking a little bit about this yesterday, about how do we, this process of amplification, this process of connecting the movements. And so I'm interested to sort of hear a little bit more about how you see that emerging, because I think this is a really key point, isn't it?
A couple of projects that I'm beginning to dream into with some friends is engaging key people in the music industry to basically create not another Live Aid, not another Woodstock, but something that is an ongoing process of inviting people who write songs and sing and play music to message the grief for what we're losing and the hope for what we can restore, and message this kind of, on the one hand, urgency of avoiding cataclysmic climate change and the shortness of the window of opportunity that we still have, but at the same time message the possibility that we can make it through the eye of the needle, and that we can create a better world together, and that it might take a bumpy ride of a couple of decades, but it's the most meaningful thing you can engage with at this point in human history, or planetary history.
It's a way of connecting with people at a different level. It's not about trying to tell them about something or try and convince them about something. It's almost in a way creating something that's so inviting and enticing that people just join because it's the joyous path forward.
And I think that's why in my book I pay such attention to questions rather than solutions.
Yes,
and
I love that about your book.
There is, if you want to engage people, ask them questions. What is meaningful to you? What would you like to see in this place? What is the vision that you have for your community's future? And then really work with the diversity of answers in a way that you can co-create from there. And I think that's where we need the creative industries to begin that kind of, to make it trendy and fashionable to ask those questions. And so everybody can go out and engage with their community to say, okay, we can't save the world, but what would we do in this place? And the beauty of this at the moment is that preparing your community for a rocky ride of 3 decades of tough climate change and global catastrophes and all that, which is probably ahead of us.
So what's that?
Building the resilience is actually the same pathway as restoring the system. So re-regionalizing production and consumption, increasing your capacity for local food, cleaning up your local waterways, reforesting, bringing your soil back to life. All of these activities are at the same time climate change reversal activities, and over 30 years will possibly get us through this rocky ride. But at the same time, they also increase the capacity that, as there will be disruptions and breakdowns, to respond to them. So there is at least a sort of win-win in taking that path.
Absolutely. I wanted to just ask you a little bit about what you think is, what's ahead of us in the next little while. What's your interpretation of what we're heading towards in the next few years even?
Well, it's staggering to think that the effects in terms of climate change that we're currently observing with these freak warm winters and flash floods and storms and superstorms and all of that is really, these are the results of greenhouse gas emissions from the 1990s. And to really feel the result of what we've emitted since will take another 10, 15 years to really hit us, which is this issue that even if we get it right now, we will actually have to prepare people for the fact that they might see a global groundswell of positive work that maintains itself for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. But during that time, things are getting worse rather than better. Like on the one hand, you see some ecosystems come back a little bit and all that, but there'll still be catastrophes. And it's this awareness that we've left it late and we are undergoing a species-level rite of passage. And part of rite of passage work is that you don't know whether you're going to make it. But that precisely is what's going to cook us down enough so our heart breaks open and our relationship to Earth and other can be healed, to my mind. And so I'm not seeing a rosy future in terms of there will be grief and suffering, but at the small scale, if we come together and we choose a positive healing future, we'll also have a wonderful time, because we'll have more meaning, we'll have more community that we've had for a long, long time. And so I'm beginning to prepare to pay more attention to the second half of global. I love my global work, and as long as the internet's running, I can do quite a bit of it without leaving home. But I really want to dig into my bioregion and build a future for this island that we're standing on, and for my family in a community on this island.
And I think so. In a way, a lot of that work through things like the permaculture movement, the eco-village movement, that they've been carried out over the last decades, is informing a lot of the kind of direction that we do need to head, but in a connected way in our bioregions. And I'm kind of seeing it where I live too, in Crystal Waters and Mullaney and our whole area. It's quite a strong place where I feel like we're starting to even create almost like a local economy where we don't need let systems or things like that. People have got to a point where they just do trade and exchange because they trust, and it's great to see how, really it's quite a short period of time you can create a regenerative culture. You can regenerate the land. Like, we've been out there for 30 years, and that's, 30 years. It's not a very long time.
Yeah, but
worked
miracles at that scale.
And it's kind of, I think it's, so what other places have you seen around the world do you think are really fabulous places to look at, to kind of see what's going well? What are some examples that we can kind of look to and go, oh, okay, that's kind of how we could do it, or that's how we could do it?
Well, I remember that when Robert Gilman and Diane Gilman traveled around all the eco-villages and looked at them all, and then they kind of came back, and this was in the 1990s, saying that not one of them was a proper sustainable community that would function out forever after, but that if you overlay the patterns that they were all working on, you could create a meta pattern that actually made sense. And so I feel tempted to name Findhorn as one of those places. I lived there for 4 years, and it also has its dysfunctionality still. And these intentional communities, they're more, I see them as pressure cookers for human development and opportunities to really learn fast and experiment with things in a way that is sort of a bit outside of the normal system. But we really need to bring it into the cities and into like normal people who don't have that impulse to join an intentional community. But in terms of maps of hope, my friend David McConville from the Buckminster Fuller Institute started a map that's on Google. If you look regenerative projects map, Google BFI, or ask me for the link.
Great.
Because what's on that map, it's not just all the projects we can find. It's basically projects that are established enough that they have a little video and they have a website and they tell a story. And there are amazing projects all around the world. Great Bear Forest in Canada and in some of the projects in Brazil that should get a lot more visibility. Ernst Götz's work on syntrophic agriculture. And all around the world.
So the link to that, because I think people who are watching this would love to kind of dive into that and see what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know the exact link. It's basically if you go onto the BFI website, Buckminster Fuller Institute website, and you look for regeneration project map, then we'll find it.
Okay, great. And I'll try and find it and I'll put it down below. So what's your next step, just as we're heading back to the finca? What do you think's your greatest work coming up in this next year or two?
One thing that, as I said, on the one hand, I really want to find a piece of land and start growing my own little food forest and increase my own local resilience a little bit, which will take up a lot of the time. But I've also got some funding to do something that I wanted to do for a very long time, which is I've been blessed with a disproportionate amount of mentors for one lifetime. It makes me almost tearful to mention it, because it's really something that for a long time I was actually finding it difficult to live with the responsibility of having learned so much from so many amazing people in a personal connection way. And it's only since my book has come out and I've started to share this more through social media that I feel a certain relief of that burden.
Yeah, right.
And basically what I want to do is to interview or have conversations with all these mentors. Some of them are now in their 80s and some of them are much younger than me. Yeah? And to basically make visible their work, again, make them visible to each other, make their wisdom known to the people that I've got on social media interested, and basically spreading the good work that they're doing, but doing it in a way that is in a conversation where I can kind of weave the connections between all those pieces they hold. So that's one of my...
Well, it's kind of funny you say that, because I kind of feel very much the same. So we should keep sharing our conversations that we have, and because I think it's a really important thing, isn't it? That it is about sharing the stories and helping to evolve a new story about where we're heading. Because that's kind of, I think, how the message does ripple out. It's through those personal stories, through the personal connections, and through feeling into it. I think we need to move out of our heads quite often and actually into our heart, and then create those really practical skills locally that you're talking about, and connect all those things together. And
again, I always find, I agree, we need to get out of our heads and into our hearts, but we also don't need to forget our heads.
Oh no, of course not.
And it's always this being really aware that one of the things that happens a lot in our movement is we're talking about paradigm shifting. I think that there's a danger in the framing of a paradigm shift that is from this to that. And too often in human history have we forgotten what was valuable about the old system in this frustration with it that then made us swing over to the new system. And I think we really need to become more integrative in that way of valuing all that diversity. And in terms of what you and I are doing with social media work, like the more we amplify each other's outputs, because there's such diversity of people out there, they will resonate. One person will resonate with that person's framing, another person's with that person. So the more we keep our diversity vibrant, the more people we can reach actively.
That's right.
And then as we do so in a mutually amplifying, supportive way, people begin to realize that like I can learn from this person too, and from this person, and we create a pathway for people to go deeper with all this.
That sounds fantastic. I look forward to working with you more and hopefully seeing you again. It's been just so wonderful.
It's wonderful.
I know.
Have a look at this background there. Look at the clouds.
We're just in such a magical place.
Yes, absolutely.
And you're just you've found yourself to a beautiful place to live. Thank you for spending the time today.
Thank you.
So thanks for tuning in to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast today. It's been a real pleasure to have your company. I invite you to subscribe and receive notification of each new weekly episode with more wonderful stories, ideas, inspiration, and common sense for living and working regeneratively. And call positive permaculture thinking and design into action in this changing world. I'm including a transcript below and a link also to my 4-part permaculture series, really looking at what is permaculture and how to make it your livelihood too. So join me again in the next episode where we talk with another fascinating guest. I look forward to seeing you there.